Uncle left me in charge of his business when he became sick, but relatives started accusing me of stealing even though I sacrificed everything to keep it alive, and then a lawyer revealed a hidden will that changed everyone's perspective forever. When my uncle first handed me the keys to his shop, it didn't feel real, almost like I was just filling in for a week until he got better. But then the weeks stretched into months and the weight of it started pressing on me in ways I didn't expect. Because it wasn't just a shop to him, it was his pride, his entire life's work, and he trusted me to keep it standing when he couldn't. And I swear to you, I poured everything I had into that place. Mornings before sunrise, nights long after everyone else was home with their families, I was there stocking shelves, balancing books, calling suppliers, patching up little things around the store that had been ignored for years. And I didn't complain, not once, because I loved him and I wanted to prove I was worthy of that trust. But the thing nobody tells you is that the harder you work, the more people start whispering. And it didn't take long before the whispers turned into pointed fingers, because some of my relatives started saying I was doing all this not for him, but for myself, that I was secretly stealing, moving money around, cutting corners, trying to take over something that didn't belong to me. And hearing that felt like someone took a knife to my chest, because I wasn't taking a dime. In fact, I was losing money, putting my own savings in just to keep things running when sales dipped, sacrificing my weekends, sacrificing my relationships, sacrificing time with friends, all to make sure my uncle had something to come back to. And yet when I'd walk into a family gathering, I'd feel the air shift, eyes on me, conversations pausing, someone muttering, "Must be nice," under their breath. And I'd go home and lie awake wondering if maybe I was crazy to keep giving so much when all I got back was suspicion. And sometimes I'd replay their words in my head, asking myself if I had made it look like I was benefiting too much, like maybe I'd gotten too comfortable running things. But then I'd remember the look on my uncle's face when he told me he needed me, his voice shaky from the chemo, and I'd remind myself why I was doing it, and I'd push through another day, even when the whispers got louder, even when my own cousins started cornering me, asking about the accounts like they had a right to demand answers, even when one of them accused me outright of siphoning money, his voice sharp and bitter, like he already believed it. And I didn't even argue, because what was the point? They had already made up their minds. So I just went back to the shop the next morning, opened up like nothing happened, because at the end of the day the only person I needed to answer to was my uncle. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't eat at me, didn't make me feel small, didn't make me wonder if maybe I should just walk away and let them handle it. Let the whole thing crumble if that's what they wanted. But I couldn't, because deep down I knew if I left, it wasn't just the business that would fall apart, it was my uncle's dignity. And I couldn't let that happen, not while he was fighting for his life. So I stayed, and I worked, and I endured the looks, the gossip, the silence that grew between me and the people I thought were supposed to be my family. And maybe that's why, when the lawyer finally called and said he needed to meet with me and the rest of them about something my uncle had arranged, I felt this strange mix of relief and dread, because part of me hoped it would clear everything up, prove that I hadn't been doing any of this for selfish reasons, but another part of me was terrified that maybe even my uncle had started to doubt me, that maybe the lawyer would reveal something that would make all their accusations feel justified. And I remember sitting in my car outside that office, hands gripping the wheel, heart pounding, trying to catch my breath before I walked in, and all I could think about was how tired I was, how worn down I had become from carrying this secret storm inside me, this desperate need to do right by him, while everyone else painted me as the villain. And for a moment, just a flicker, I wondered what it would feel like to finally be seen, to finally have someone say out loud what I had been trying to prove all along, that I wasn't the thief. I was the one holding everything together while the rest of them stood by and judged. When I walked into that lawyer's office, the tension was so thick I could almost taste it. My cousins were already there, sitting stiff in their chairs, eyes narrowing the moment they saw me, like I had no right to even be in the room. And part of me wanted to turn around, just walk out and never look back. But I couldn't, not after everything, so I sat down across from them, my hands still shaking from the drive over, and I kept staring at the floor because looking them in the eye felt impossible. Then the lawyer cleared his throat and started talking about my uncle, about how he had prepared something months ago, before the worst of his illness set in. And the whole time my cousins were shifting in their seats, whispering to each other. One of them even smirked, like he already knew what was coming, like he thought the lawyer was about to confirm every ugly thing they'd been saying about me. And I could feel my chest tightening, my stomach knotting up, because in that moment, I wasn't even sure I wanted to hear what was inside that envelope he had on the desk. But I also couldn't breathe until I knew, so I sat there frozen as the lawyer opened it, and pulled out a letter in my uncle's handwriting. And just seeing his handwriting again hit me like a punch, because it was shaky but still his, still familiar. and I could almost hear his voice in my head, the way he used to say my name when he was proud of me. And the lawyer started reading out loud, slowly, carefully, and the room went so quiet that I swear I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And the first thing my uncle wrote was that he wanted to thank me for stepping up when he couldn't, that he knew exactly how much I had given up to keep the business alive, that he had seen me working, sacrificing, holding it all together while others doubted me. And I don't even know how to explain what that felt like, to hear those words spoken out loud in front of the very people who had been tearing me down, because it was like all the air I'd been gasping for finally filled my lungs, and my eyes started to burn. But I didn't want to cry in front of them, so I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, trying to hold it in, and the lawyer kept reading, saying that my uncle wanted it to be known, in writing, that I had not stolen a single thing, that in fact I had put more into the shop than I had ever taken out, that without me it would have collapsed months ago. And at that point, one of my cousins actually shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his hands, and for the first time I felt a sliver of something. Maybe it was vindication, maybe it was just exhaustion. But then came the part none of us expected, because my uncle wrote that if anything were to happen to him, he wanted me, not them, not anyone else, to inherit the business, because he believed I was the only one who would treat it with the same respect and love that he had. And the silence after those words was deafening, like the whole world had stopped for a second, and I felt this wave of disbelief crash over me, because I never once thought he'd leave it to me. I honestly believed I was just holding it in place until he came back, and hearing that he wanted me to have it wasn't joy, it wasn't victory, it was this heavy, complicated weight pressing down on me, because I knew what that would mean. I knew how much worse the family would turn on me now, but at the same time there was this tiny flicker of warmth inside, knowing that he trusted me more than anyone, that he saw me when no one else did. And I sat there, hands trembling, as the lawyer finished reading, folding the letter back up neatly, placing it on the desk like it was something sacred, and no one spoke for what felt like forever, until one of my cousins suddenly snapped, his voice sharp and bitter, saying it was impossible, that my uncle must have been manipulated, that I must have tricked him somehow, and his words cut deep, because even after hearing my uncle's own handwriting, his own words, they still couldn't accept it, and all the old anger I'd been swallowing down started bubbling up, and before I could stop myself I said, "Do you really think I wanted this? Did you think that I wanted to spend my life, time, money just to be called a thief by those who knew me when I was young?" And my voice broke in the middle, but I didn't care, because it was the truth, and for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't going to sit quietly and take it, and the room fell into this uncomfortable silence again, the one where everyone is too stunned to react, and I leaned back in my chair, wiped at my eyes hurriedly, and thought to myself that perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of everything changing, because whether they liked it or not, the truth was finally out, there, in black and white, and they couldn't take that away from me, no matter how hard they tried, though secretly I also knew this was far from over, that the hardest part was yet to come, because taking over the business wasn't about keeping doors open, it was about dealing with all of them, every single day, and proving over and over that I deserved what my uncle left me, and honestly, in that moment, I wasn't sure I had the strength for it. After that meeting at the lawyer's office, things didn't magically settle down the way I secretly hoped they might. If anything, they got messier, because the will had pulled the truth out into the open, but people don't like to admit when they've been wrong, especially not family, so instead of easing up, some of them doubled down, little digs at me whenever we crossed paths, passive-aggressive comments about how I must be enjoying my new empire, and I'd just stand there, feeling the heat rise in my face, biting my tongue because arguing would only feed their story, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction, but the truth is, it wore me down, day after day, and the shop became the only place where I felt steady, because at least there I knew what I was fighting for, and I'd throw myself into it even harder, repainting the faded walls, reorganizing the stockroom, negotiating better deals with suppliers, and sometimes I'd catch myself staying late just to sweep the floors. Like, I couldn't bear to go home where the silence waited for me, silence from family who used to call, used to invite me places, but now treated me like I had betrayed them somehow, and at night when I closed my eyes, I'd replay everything, wondering how keeping something alive for my uncle had turned into a war zone between me and people I thought I could count on, and sometimes I'd question myself too, like was it worth it? Was I clinging to this place out of love for him, or just out of stubbornness, refusing to let go because I couldn't stand the thought of them being right? And I'd wrestle with that until the early hours of the morning, staring at the ceiling. But every time I'd open the shop the next day and see a regular customer smile, or hear someone say, "Your uncle would be proud," I'd remember why I kept going. Because deep down I wasn't doing this for me or even for them. I was doing it for him, for the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who slipped me candy when my parents said no, who gave me advice in that quiet, steady way that always made me feel like I mattered, and I couldn't walk away from that, not when the shop was the last piece of him I could still hold on to. But the loneliness of it all kept building, heavier with each day, because running a business is one thing, but running it with the weight of a fractured family pressing on your back is something else entirely. And sometimes customers would leave and I'd lock the door behind them and just stand there in the empty store, feeling the ache of it, wondering why love turns to envy so quickly, why people can't just be glad when someone steps up. And one night, after a long day, I sat at the counter with the books spread out in front of me, and I realized I hadn't eaten in almost 12 hours, and I just broke down, right there, head in my hands, tears slipping out before I could stop them, because the exhaustion, the accusations, the responsibility, it all came crashing down at once. And for a second I thought about walking away, shutting the place down, handing them the keys and saying, "Fine, here, you deal with it." But then I saw this old photo my uncle had taped up by the register years ago. It was him standing in front of the shop when it first opened, smiling so big, and I swear I could hear his laugh in my head, and it pulled me back, it steadied me, and I wiped my face and whispered out loud, "I'm not letting you down," and I meant it, even though it hurt, even though it felt like I was fighting this battle completely alone. And in a way I was, because none of them offered to help, not once, not with the bills, not with the late nights, not even with the smallest tasks. They just sat back, criticized, and waited for me to fail. And the more I realized that, the more I started to understand something that cut deep. Family doesn't always mean support. Sometimes it means being the target of people's insecurities. Sometimes it means being punished for carrying weight they couldn't or wouldn't. And I started carrying that lesson inside me, quietly, not bitter exactly, but changed, because I didn't look at them the same anymore. I didn't expect them to show up for me. I stopped waiting for their approval, and that shift, as painful as it was, made me stand a little taller when I unlocked the doors each morning. Because the only approval I needed was already written in that letter my uncle left, the one they hated so much, the one that proved I was trusted, chosen, believed in. And on the hardest days I'd take that letter out of its envelope just to see his words again, to remind myself that no matter how loud the accusations got, the truth was already spoken, and it couldn't be undone. And even though the fights and the whispers and the cold shoulders didn't stop, something inside me started to change, like I was finally learning how to live with the noise, how to push forward even when people wanted me to fall. And maybe that's what my uncle had seen in me all along, that stubborn streak, that ability to keep going when everything around me said stop. And maybe that's why he chose me, not because I was perfect or stronger or smarter, but because he knew I wouldn't walk away when it mattered most. The months after that were a blur of long days and heavy nights, and even though the business started to stabilize, the silence from my family never really lifted, it just changed shape. And sometimes that was harder than the open accusations had been, because before at least I knew where I stood with them. But now it was like walking into a room full of shadows, everyone watching but no one saying anything, their eyes following me like I had stolen something that was never meant to be mine. And maybe that's what stung the most, because they weren't just doubting my choices, they were doubting my heart, doubting that all the sacrifices I made were ever real. And the truth is, it hurt more than I let on. I'd put on a steady face during the day, handling customers, suppliers, paperwork, but then I'd drive home in the dark and sometimes have to pull over just to breathe, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached, whispering to myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't selfish, that I wasn't the thief they painted me as. Because even when you know the truth, when enough people throw lies at you, pieces of it stick, and you start to wonder if maybe they see something in you that you can't. And I hated that doubt. I hated how it crawled into my chest late at night when everything was quiet. But then there were moments, small but powerful, that reminded me why I stayed. Like when an old man who had been shopping there for decades patted my shoulder and said, "Your uncle would be proud of how you've kept this place alive." Or when a young couple told me they loved how the store felt welcoming again. Little words, little glimpses of something good, and those moments mattered more than I can explain. They were like lifelines, pulling me back when the weight of all the whispers tried to drag me under. And as time went on, I started to realize something that changed me, that sometimes the validation you're waiting for from the people closest to you might never come. And you have to learn how to live without it. And I don't mean in a cold or bitter way, but in a way where you stop handing them the power to define your worth. And I think that's what my uncles will really gave me, not just the business, not just the legal proof that I hadn't done wrong, but the push I needed to finally stand in my own truth, to stop chasing approval that was never going to be given. And slowly I started letting go of the anger, not forgiving everything, not forgetting, but loosening my grip on the hope that one day they'd all come around, because maybe they never would, maybe some wounds in families never close, and that realization was painful. But it was also freeing, and I remember one night I stayed late at the shop, the lights dim, the register drawer closed, and I sat there alone, the hum of the refrigerators in the background, and I thought about him, about my uncle, about all the nights he must have sat in the same spot, counting the same bills, worrying, the same worries, and I wondered if he had ever felt the kind of loneliness I was feeling now, and for a moment I swear I could feel him there, not in some dramatic way, just in a quiet steadying presence, like a hand on my shoulder, and it made me smile through the ache. Because maybe that was enough, maybe the real inheritance wasn't the business at all. Maybe it was the lesson that doing the right thing doesn't always look good to other people, that sacrifice doesn't always get applause, that sometimes the most important choices in life are the ones no one thanks you for. And as I locked up that night and stepped outside, the air cool on my face, I felt lighter than I had in months, because I finally understood that I didn't need to keep proving myself, not to them, not to anyone. The proof was already in the work, in the long days, in the fact that the doors were still open, in the fact that my uncle had seen me for who I really was, and trusted me enough to write it down, and maybe one day my family will see it too, maybe they won't, but either way, I'll carry that truth with me, because at the end of it all, the only person I needed to make proud already told me I had, and that's something they can't take away, no matter how many times they whisper otherwise. And maybe that's what growing up really is, realizing that sometimes the love you thought you'd always count on shifts, fades, disappoints, but there's still a way to keep standing, to keep giving, to keep holding on to the people and the values that matter, even if you have to stand alone to do it. And walking home that night, under the quiet streetlights, I felt a strange peace wash over me, not because everything was fixed, but because I finally knew I didn't need it to be. I just needed to keep going, one day, one choice, one breath at a time, and for the first time in a long while, I believed I could.